So tell me a little bit about your backgrounds and starting the program here.
What do you want to start with?
Alrighty. He realized my frustration and desire to move on. I'd known about PAs, since I was in the Army, and we were out for a beer one November night, and I said, "Yeah, well, next year I'm gonna apply." And he was like, "Next year? What are you waiting for?" And applications were due, in the beginning of December, so I ran around like a madman, got all my letters of reference, records from these different schools I'd been to, turned in my application, got into the course, and rolled from there. So left Illinois and moved back to Utah, and that's where I spent my whole clinical time. I spent about 5 years working at the 4th Street Homeless Clinic. When I first got back to Salt Lake, which at the time was part of the Community Health Center system. And then from there I moved up to the VA Medical Center, and for the next 8 years worked full-time and then part-time at the VA, and then found clinical medicine more than I could handle with my job in academia. So became an academic.
Having practiced as a PA in the Netherlands in a first world setting, and not just in the first world setting, but also in a very what you would call upper class environment in The Hague, where we serviced many embassies and international organizations, in a primary care setting, was very satisfying, very challenging in its own way. But I've been drawn to clinical work in a developing country like South Africa, and so that drew me. And I certainly got a lot of very, very challenging circumstances to work in South Africa, and so that that challenge was great, because it brought out a lot of the skills. The skills that I'd learned but never applied. And the best example was when we were 4 clinicians servicing a 180-bed hospital during a national healthcare strike, where about 90% of the healthcare workers left the hospital, and so we had to do everything ourselves, and those including radiologists. So your clinical exams had to rely, or your management had to rely on your clinical exams only, where you have to put in a chest strain and trust that you have examined the patient sufficiently to warrant that procedure.
But thinking about a particular patient, gosh. There was a guy who was, he's a psychotic diabetic, and he was normally cared for by my partner in crime at the time, Fred Bosenthal, who became a great friend of mine, and I just saw him a few months ago in the States too, and he and Fred had a pretty good relationship, but this gentleman came in one day when Fred wasn't there, and he said he was having a problem down there on his feet, and took his shoe off, pulls his sock off, and all these maggots fall out of his sock. He was right there. Of course, the end of his toe was pretty much gone. And he's got a farm of maggots living on there, which, of course, nowadays we use maggots to clean wounds. But, I had Gene put his shoes back on and leave the maggots right where they were and send him up to the hospital to have that looked at. But there was pleasure and there was pain in a place like that. A lot of sad stories, a lot of humorous stories like that. You met people who were aged well beyond their actual years because of being homeless or living in such challenged situations. A lot of really sad things that you couldn't do much about. But day-to-day care, I think we did a good job.
And the living conditions of people there were very poor. No fresh water, and a lot of the fresh water that was there was very polluted from insecticides and the rivers were very, very polluted because of the people washing in the rivers. So, those kind of issues, a lot of malnutrition, a lot of violence, against children, a lot of violence against women, which made it, which was one of the very challenging parts of the job.